Hello everyone, and welcome to our talk, Designing for the Next Billion Users, Accessibility UX Insights from the Emerging Markets. I am Astrid Weber, and I lead UX research for accessibility engineering at Google.
I'm Nitya Sambasivan, and I'm a UX researcher for emerging markets at Google.
The first half of today's talk will include an overview about accessibility, an introduction to the people who live in the next billion user context of the emerging markets, and finally end with closing and finally we're going to take a closer look at the NBU markets and those users that profit the most from accessible technology. In the second part of the talk, we're going to introduce you to our NBU accessibility framework that will help you as app developers to make the most out of the learnings of today's talk. Before we get started, I want to ensure you that we do not have any technical difficulties with our presentation. We simply modified this screen to give you a glimpse, or merely just an impression, what this presentation would look like for someone with low vision. More than 250 million people in today's world have low vision, and today is Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So I'm more happy than ever I could be to have all of you here attend this talk with us, having that day happening. So let me introduce you to one of those users who has actual low vision. His name is Jonah, and he's living in the south of Jakarta, together with his parents and his 3 siblings. So Jonah is the oldest one of those, and he's supporting his family because they have a neighborhood store where Jonah is helping out. When Jonah was 3 years old, he had an eye infection. And even though the doctors performed surgery, unfortunately, Jonah was left legally blind. What does that mean? That means that Jonah can only see objects that are very close by or that are extremely enlarged. 20 years ago, Jonah would have had very limited opportunity to help his parents run the store. But today, thanks to assistive technology, Jonah is able to go to the market, as you see him do here in the picture, and pick objects for his parents' store. And his phone is helping him to enlarge, to check what it is, what the quality is. And Jonah is just one example of us today that we would like to take as a starting point to introduce you to how much technology can help people with disabilities in order to live their lives and do the things that matter to them. Worldwide, there is more than 1 billion people who have a disability. For the US, that's 1 out of 5 people. But actually, that is not even the full picture yet. Because many of us experience so-called temporary disabilities. For example, you may be pregnant and have limited mobility, or you might have a broken wrist and are suddenly not able to operate your phone anymore. Accessibility does not stop there. With a society that is growing older than ever before, many people are affected by hard of hearing, hand tremors, and limited walking ability. Even children have accessibility needs. Our environment, often enough, is not created for people with various body sizes, and if you can't read or write, much information remains inaccessible to you. Even those of you who might think, I have no accessibility needs whatsoever, think further. Ever been to a bar where there was loud music playing and you were trying to have a conversation with a friend? That's basically an experience of someone who is hard of hearing. Or maybe you tried to follow the sports commentary on the screen, but you couldn't because the environment was just too noisy. So all of us encounter situations every single day in which we have accessibility needs. To sum it up, while developing applications, we should never assume that users constantly have their full vision, their hands, their hearing, or their full cognitive abilities available to them. Did you know that some of the most innovative and most used products were actually designed because people had accessibility inspirations? The email, the way we all know it and use it every single day, was originally developed in 1972 by Vint Cerf when he started to program the first email protocol. He firmly believed that the electronic letters are going to change our interactions and our communications. And yes, he was right. But what very little people know is that Vint Cerf's wife is deaf, and for him, it was the only way to communicate with her while he was at work. Just in recent years, Joshua Silver, a professor and physicist from the United Kingdom, created a new form of liquid-filled corrective lens that can easily be adjusted for the patient. This low-cost approach works for over 90% of the vision corrections in the world. The glasses are particularly useful in the context of emerging markets, where often enough you don't have access to a trained optometrist. And with that, I hand it over to Nithya.
It's easy to see how much technological innovation is being inspired by accessibility and the next billion users. Out of all the people in this world that have disabilities, 80% of them live in the global south, in emerging markets. So designing for the next billion users and designing for accessibility is a natural fit. If you want the next billion users to use your product, it'll be even more important that your technology considers their lives, their values, their use cases, and their desires and needs. In this millennium, the vast majority of mobile phone growth has happened south of the equator. While industrialized nations are plateauing in their internet and mobile phone growth, growth in emerging markets is 10 times that of Western nations. In the next few years, 1 billion new people are expected to come online for the first time from emerging markets. And here are some examples of how developing products that work for use cases for emerging markets can deliver a globally superior experience. Apps and content that render directions when one does not have connectivity are useful in the everyday context of a small town in Nairobi, near Nairobi, or when you're out of reach of cell signal on the way to Yosemite. Other innovations that have originated or gained traction in emerging markets that have traveled sideways or scaled up in many different parts of the world are mobile money, QR code services, peer-to-peer sharing, or cash on delivery, just to name a few. So what we argue for is that designing for inclusion is designing for everybody. When we think inclusively beyond our immediate context and the people that we know, our products become far more meaningful and useful to those who may try to use them. So until now, we see that accessibility is a relevant topic for us, and especially for those living in emerging markets. Let's take a closer look at who these next billion users are and learn more about their behaviors and contexts. Mobiles are often the first and only device through which many people come online in emerging markets. Unlike the desktop trajectory of AOL to search to email to social media, many people in emerging markets get introduced to the internet through social media and on a mobile phone without any preconceived notions through mobile number phone-based app registration. So the mobile then is not just an on-the-go device, but is the primary device. Phones in emerging markets tend to live for much longer due to circulation as gifts from urban to rural, secondhand devices, and to avoid wastefulness in general. Due to longer lifespans, older operating systems tend to persist. Many of these phones have low RAM, storage, battery life, small screens, or multiple SIM cards in order to fit into the $40 to $100 bracket. Many devices have broken screens or damaged phone covers, not the pristine conditions that we imagine when we're designing for them. A primary driver for this democratization of the internet is prepaid access. 96% of mobile users in India and 95% in South Africa are on prepaid. So prepaid requires lower financial commitment on part of the user compared to postpaid, where one has to pay a steep amount at the end of each month. In prepaid, a user can decide when and how much they want to top up for and which network they want to top up on. And users have to do a complex pre-calculation of size, validity, type of network, and carrier. And they're usually assisted by somebody at the mobile shop. It's easy to get access to scratch cards in emerging markets at grocery stores or traffic lights, and nowadays even online. Sometimes users run out of data and wait until there are better finances or buy small packs. So this is in contrast to the model around which most apps are developed, which is 24/7 connectivity. 50% of the world is now online in 2017. But the internet is slow, expensive, and intermittent in emerging markets, creating a more constrained experience. The average speed in the United States is 16 Mbps. In Egypt, it is around 3 Mbps. Internet can also be intermittent. 3G is limited. Cellular networks switch between 3G to 4G to offline. Internet can be expensive, too. To buy 1 GB of data in sub-Saharan Africa, it costs 18% of the average person's monthly income. And the comparable figure in the US is less than 1%. Even when Wi-Fi is available, it is almost always capped. Truly uncapped Wi-Fi is very expensive. So what this translates to is that network is top of mind for many, rather than just focusing on the app experience that we're designing for. When one goes online, one of the first few things they learn is how to manage a network and strategies and workarounds for data management. These are completely unobvious and learned from top-up shops or friends and family. Mobile data gets turned off from Android settings in order to control costs. We have met users who have broadband but regularly unplug their routers at night. App updates are usually ignored because they cost money. Peer-to-peer sharing of APKs, not applications, and media is used for rich content. Media are often downloaded for consumption when there is a lack of connectivity. So the network is never a given. When it comes to using devices, diverse literacies, languages, and technology capabilities are at play. 55% of the content online is in English, but less than 1/3 of Indians can speak English. Fluency in English is proportionate to socioeconomic status, and despite low fluency, interestingly, many people prefer to use English because it is the aspirational language of upward mobility. While there are many phone UI options, many users prefer the fluidity across languages and transliterate as needed. Multilingualism is common. Literacy levels vary, with about 781 million adults being non-literate, most of whom are women. A vibrant social setup exists in emerging markets. Information is more trustworthy when it comes from people rather than applications or software. New internet users introduced to technology through friends or agents or family. Resources, including technologies, are often shared, and sharing overcomes a number of literacy and usability issues and builds upon trust. This is evidenced in borrowing sugar from neighbors, babysitting friends' kids, or helping a friend get a new application and teaching them how to use it. Apps are installed through friends because they recommend them and transfer them, and not through the Play Store. Onboarding through screens does not work. It is often through people that one learns how to use an application. Women and minorities are often marginalized when it comes to access. Throughout the emerging markets, women are less likely to own a phone or go online compared to men. In addition to gender, the social order, religions, identity norms, and politics all enable or deter access to technology. For example, one may put away phones on Fridays or Saturdays, depending on their religion. Taking phones out in public places may not be acceptable, depending on the safety norms. Content may be considered offensive in a different cultural context.
Thank you, Nithya. Let's take a moment to recap what we learned so far. People who live in emerging markets are mobile natives. They use low-cost devices and are more concerned about data consumption and the costs that come with it. And often, they have different cultural norms. Recall that 80% of people with disabilities live in emerging markets. That should be reason enough for us to take a closer look at the intersection of temporary, situational, and permanent accessibility needs among those next billion users. The perceived value of people with disabilities in many societies in the emerging markets is low. In rural areas, people with disabilities face resentment, as people believe that they are kind of second-class citizens that bring shame to their families. Sadly, a consequence of that is that children of those families often don't go to school, and some members of the village even consider them to be cursed. While this image is luckily updated a lot in the rural area, in the urban areas, people with disabilities are still massively underestimated by society. Due to that, the people themselves also don't believe that they can contribute in the same way towards their social environment and their families. I'd like to illustrate that with a quote from one of our blind participants. Mohammed said, "People think disabilities are a curse, like the parents did something wrong, so they give birth to a child like that." People with disabilities also struggle with an inaccessible environment around them. Most infrastructure was not designed for those who are blind, rely on a wheelchair, or can't follow the general speed of mobility around them. For example, even getting on a crowded bus or a motorcycle taxi can be really challenging. Generally, the quality of education in most emerging markets is lower than in the Western countries. People with disabilities are less likely to attend school and also to finish it. If students have special needs, oftentimes the parents are expected to attend the classes and to help their children, or to pay someone to do that on their behalf, which obviously not every family is financially able to support. While support options through the local healthcare system, international NGOs, and local community centers sometimes exist, people often don't know about those, and as a result, don't take full advantage. Also, asking for help is unfortunately often frowned upon. While laws on inclusiveness and disabilities exist in most of the countries, too often they are not being reinforced. Farina, who is a deaf graphic designer that we met, showed us how she had applied for a total of 438 jobs, but was not accepted to one of them. And lastly, people with disabilities struggle on a very personal level with their own limitations when it comes to social activities, which obviously becomes more and more important the more you grow up. For example, a deaf student often will find themselves locked out from conversations among their peers. Later on in life, when people become married and start families, those with disabilities are again at a disadvantage because they are considered less attractive as romantic partners, and people do not believe that they can lead and support a family in the same way. By now, we gained a better understanding about the disabilities and the struggles that come along for those people who have them in the emerging markets. In the offline world, users who are deaf, blind, mobility, or cognitively impaired struggle with gaining access to education, employment, and social integration. But luckily, many of them have technology devices that can make all the difference for them. People with disabilities are starting to use mobile technologies to grow personal independence. For example, you will see usage of mobility apps to organize their own transportation and to take advantage of delivery options. Services that mean convenience to some people offer a new form of freedom and independence to those who were previously depending on their family and friends to do things on behalf of them. With traditional transactions, users who are blind often had to trust that they don't get cheated. Those who are deaf were not able to negotiate a price, and those who can't walk often enough didn't even make it to the physical store. With mobile payments and online purchase, people gain control and receive more equal treatment. And for those with reduced mobility, it is essential to keep in touch with friends and family. Social networks and instant messaging services enable them to participate, contribute, and stay in touch. This is equally true, by the way, for education and work, which is really the foundation for them. Thanks to assistive technologies and their ability to enlarge, announce, and react to spoken commands, impaired students are getting to the point to be socially, productively, and collaboratively just on the same level as their peers. And while workplaces have become more accessible, thanks to assistive technologies, also the amount of general business opportunities is increasing through software. The majority of people in the emerging markets work in the informal sector, and they might operate their little micro-business. People with disabilities can now start their own business at home, just like one of our deaf users did. She plans to sell her new clothing line through the internet. We're really excited how much technology has already driven change to those with accessibility needs in the emerging markets. At the same time, the future potential is even bigger. Let's do a quick recap. So far, we looked at the themes of accessibility and the next billion users. And within the field of accessibility, we touched on cognition, mobility, vision, and hearing. Within the field of the next billion users, we learned about infrastructure, affordability, literacy, languages, and culture. And at the intersection of those two, we identified 4 themes that unite them and that we can address through global accessibility guidelines. Those 4 themes are awareness, access, relevance, and design. So let's take a look at these guidelines and how you, as a app developer or designer, can make your applications accessible for the next billion users. The first category of our guidelines is dedicated to awareness. Being aware of your users' needs and the potential impact that you can have on their lives is the foundation for any universally accessible application. And so it comes as no surprise that we recommend that you get to know all your users, especially those who are very different from yourself. Now, how can you get to know your users, you're asking? First of all, we recommend that you take advantage of the wealth of information that is provided on the internet. Check out YouTube for some very inspirational TED Talks on the topic. Secondly, we recommend that you make time to attend talks. You're here today at our talk, and with that, you actually already started. Conferences and local events often host researchers from emerging countries. Go, learn from their expertise. And lastly, you can use research tools like the mobile Vanny to gather feedback from the users directly themselves. Tools like the mobile Vanny get you to collect the app's feedback from those users who live in the most remote places in the world. Secondly, we recommend that you represent inclusively. How can you represent inclusively? Let us show you some tips and tricks with a concrete example of the warm welcome. First of all, check how diverse your imagery is by race, clothing, physical ability, and social class. And secondly, the details matter. Take a look at these pictures here. Are they inclusive? Yes, the hands represent different skin colors. But I would argue, do you see left-handers, fingers missing, painted nails, bangles? Diversity does not mean putting the person with a physical impairment into a solo job or into a corner. And lastly, universal design in your warm welcome means that everyone, independent of their abilities, can access and complete it. On here, we see an example of 2 warm welcomes that I'd like to point out to you. The first example is our Android onboarding experience, which contains vision settings since the Android N release. That way, users can set their preferences in regard to large text, magnification gestures, display size, and talkback at the very beginning. And so also their onboarding is accessible. In regard to your own app, double check. Does it actually respect the accessibility settings from the operating system? Secondly, Google Wallet designers were mindful when designing that warm welcome screen by picking a person with color within their illustrations. And with that, I hand it over to Nithya, who's going to tell you more about the category of access.
Thanks, Astrid. Then, can users install your application? Is it easy to use once they get access to it? Will your users be able to use your software without incurring a major financial cost or a social cost? Can your design be responsive and work seamlessly over slow and intermittent networks and a lack of connectivity? So connectivity issues without accessibility support break the whole user experience. Just imagine waiting for a page to load that doesn't tell you what is happening, or filling out a very long form, and then the system loses the connection. Enabling state transitions between slow, offline, and intermittent connectivity through progress indicators, smart auto defaults, or local caching of input can be helpful. Render content progressively instead of a batch update so that your application provides the perception of being responsive. Pre-cache frequently used content, especially when there's a Wi-Fi connection. Design for offline as a steady state and not as an edge case. Create a meaningful offline state with help resources or onboarding screens with cached contents or placeholder UIs instead of showing a blank screen. For example, YouTube's adaptive bitrate streaming allows video resolution to automatically respond to the bandwidth conditions of the user. So in order to ensure that your app really works for everybody, we highly recommend you test your app with accessibility services. So how do we do that? It's a straightforward process. Treat your accessibility settings as a critical user experience and not a checklist. Simulate the most important use cases and user journeys with accessibility settings enabled. And lastly, you should test your application with real users. Only if you test it with those who know what it means to be blind or deaf, you will get a complete picture of accessibility in your application. We recommend you try the Google Accessibility Scanner, which is available on the Play Store to debug your application. Next, can you design, render, and operate meaningfully on low specification devices and older operating systems? Research shows that using applications on low-end devices is much harder for those with disabilities. In dealing with clogged up memory, slow phones, and lack of indicators of resource depletion, like when battery runs out. Test your app layout on 480 by 800 pixels and less than 4-inch screen sizes, which are the most common screen sizes in the world. Provide controls and visibility into your application size and application data as well within settings, and alert users when they reach high levels of app data, and provide the ability to move your app to SD cards. Minimize battery usage for your application. Remember, electricity is not uniformly available throughout this world. Many people have to pay to charge their phones, and there may be load shedding or complete blackouts. Build backwards compatibility for older operating systems. For example, Google Translate takes less than 10 MB and allows offline downloads of languages. Does your application respect your users' budget and financial conditions? Reduce the size of your app. In our research, we repeatedly hear from users throughout emerging markets that they won't install apps that are more than 5 MB or 10 MB. Limit high bandwidth consumption, such as videos, rich images, or feed models. Create transparency into the data-heavy portions of your application, and request user permission before engaging in high bandwidth activities. For example, are you downloading tiles for some offline usage? Mention the size and get user permission. Since application updates get ignored by users in emerging markets, limit the size and frequency of your app updates. Consider adding in-app cards for new updates. Explain the value of the update you're providing and humanize it. For example, YouTube Go, which was built from the ground up for emerging markets, allows users to choose video downloads by stating the storage size in addition to resolution. And for a user, storage size is a proxy for the data costs that they will incur, which allows them to make an informed choice. A third category is about relevance. Your app needs to be relevant and meaningful in the context of users' daily lives and specific needs. Does your application feel local and speak the language of your users? Simple, clear, global English makes it easy for anybody to understand your product. Avoid slang terms like dude and got it. Use a combination of words and graphical cues so that it can provide value to both low-literate and high-literate users. Minimize hierarchy in your design, like menus and tree structures, and lay out content for browsing. This is much more accessible for people with disabilities and low-literate users. Reduce text input or simplify text input with tap versus type, auto-completed text, or curated content lists. For example, Google Search has a clever language selector. Instead of hiding language under the settings at the bottom of the page, Search presents both English and Hindi options. So Hindi language users can easily identify the Hindi text and choose it. Does your application respect socio-cultural norms in the content and user interface? Understand the local context of use of your application, and this includes gender, religion, politics, social structures, and public safety. people with disabilities are very likely to get regular support from people that they know or hire people to help them in going through the city or daily activities or navigating applications. Consider how you can leverage this social infrastructure. In our research, as an example, on public Wi-Fi in India, we heard some concerns about entering phone numbers in the login screen due to harassment fears. Indian law requires public Wi-Fi users to enter their phone numbers in order to provide a code to access public Wi-Fi. So as a design response, before a person enters their number, we explicitly state your number is safe with us and link to FAQ, which comes from the questions that were raised in user research sessions. Back to Astrid.
Thank you, Nithya. The last category of our design guidelines is actually design. The design choices you make while developing your app will ultimately decide if people will be able to use your application or not. We have picked 2 design guidelines for today that are easy for you to apply and make all the difference for your users. You can find more design recommendations if you look into the accessibility section of material design online. We recommend that you define a color palette for your app that takes contrast as an important factor in consideration. So, how do we get to sufficient contrast? Life and work is often happening outdoors, in rural areas, mostly in direct sunlight. Sufficient contrast can be the difference between usable and unusable. For users who have low vision, it is essential. Remember Jonah from the beginning? He can only use applications on his phone that have really good contrast. Sufficient contrast is defined as a contrast ratio of 4.5 to 1 for normal text. If you have large text, that ratio is 3 to 1, and large text is being defined 18 points or larger. Also, just a tip and aside, there are various hex color testing tools online that make it very easy to find out what's the contrast ratio between the colors that you're using. All these tools are for free. Next, our last guideline is actually around color alone is never enough. And what does that mean? Colors mean very different things in different parts of the world. On low-resolution devices, it is much harder to actually tell colors apart. In addition to that, people will differently perceive colors. We call that also color blindness. Within the result of 2 people looking at 2 different colors, you might be surprised how different they might perceive them. In order to be accessible, we recommend that you never rely on color alone within your app design. What else can you do, you ask me? Well, including design elements in addition to color to ensure that everyone receives the same information. That can be in the form of visual cues that help you to communicate the stage in which your design is at the moment. Utilizing elements such as strokes, indicators, patterns, textures, or text to describe the actions and the content help your users a lot. And again, there's also free colorblind simulation filters on the internet that can help you to actually check what your application looks through the eyes of various users. And with that, we've reached the end of our talk. We will leave you with an overview of our global accessibility framework. We hope that you will continue to challenge your own assumptions and also build up your awareness after you leave this talk. That you will build options for all your users and all their devices, and that you will succeed in offering a relevant app that will make design choices that will make your app robustly and work for really everyone. We mentioned these throughout the talk. Here they are again. Those are our last resources. And with that, I say thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to come up to the microphones.